Welcome to CICAN's Perspective Live, the show where we talk about what matters to you. I'm your host, Andrew Beatty. On today's show, we'll be engaged in a great discussion on amplifying Black, Indigenous, and people of color voices. Now, representation, visibility, and opportunity. Now, the BIPOC acronym is not one we may be totally familiar with yet, but I rest assured we sure will be in the days, weeks, and years to come. It'll become a permanent part of our vocabulary for sure. Shortly, I'll be joined by my co-host, Dr. Misheck Mwaba, President and CEO of Bow Valley College. Misheck will be hosting a lively discussion with three guests on our topic today. Michael Bach, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, and from Toronto. Neil Price, who's the Dean of the School of Justice and Community Development at Fleming College. And Elsa Mondésir Villefort, Coordinatrice Citoyenneté, Jeunesse, past chair of the Impact National Advisory Committee, and a member of the Youth Canadian Commission of UNESCO. I'm pleased to announce that this episode today is sponsored by the Accreditation Council for Business Schools and Programs. And before we get started, let's enjoy a word from Dr. Bruce Tatar, the chair and board of directors of ACBSP.
ACBSP is a specialized accrediting body that accredits business schools and programs around the world, and our mission is to pursue a better tomorrow by advancing and recognizing excellence in business education through continuous improvement. ACBSP's diverse membership of 1,200 plus campuses in 60 countries and comprising over 13,000 unique individuals includes 18 Canadian colleges and universities who jointly form our newest region, ACBSP Region 11, the Canadian Council. The importance of Canada to ACBSP is evident in the fact that two Canadians have held ACBSP's top leadership position as chair of the board of directors, Dean Mary Vaughan of Seneca Business, and I'm proud to say, myself. It's because of how proud we are of our Canadian schools and individual members that we are honored to sponsor this event. At the heart of ACBSP's core values is a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is our belief that educational institutions, and especially higher education institutions, must play a leading role in helping to make positive change in our society and to help build towards a better tomorrow for everyone. The cause of social justice is embedded not only in the very fiber of ACBSP as an organization, but it's something that we seek to encourage in all of our members, both institutional and individual. Each of us, both as organizations and as individuals, must ask ourselves for what role we have to play in eliminating systemic racism, in creating equity, and in celebrating diversity. What role do we have in driving meaningful change, and how do we as educational institutions ensure these changes take place on our campuses? How many times have we been here before, only to talk, but enact no real change? This time, we cannot let the opportunity slip by. We cannot just talk about the issue. This time, we must take action and solve the problems of racism and unintended bias. In order to amplify the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in our world, we must start by amplifying their voices on our campuses, by giving them the freedom, the encouragement, and the right to speak. We must also help them to become the business and social leaders of a better tomorrow, a tomorrow where all people can take their rightful place in helping to build a better future. And to do that, we must start by redesigning our own institutions' diversity, equity, and inclusion policies to better support student success on and off campus. ACBSP has spent the last 6 months working to improve its stand on diversity, equity, and inclusion, believing that no matter how well we were doing, that we could do better. That is why we support CICAN's desire to hold this event and to delve deeper into what may well be the most important issue of our times. We cannot achieve the better tomorrow we seek until every member of the human race is an equal partner in that search, and we applaud you all for being here today to make that happen. So on behalf of the ACBSP Board of Directors and all of our member institutions outside of Canada, I wish you a wonderful event and say again how proud we are to support the Canadian members of our ACBSP family.
On those nice remarks from our sponsor, I want to talk to you a little bit about the format for today's show. It's a web TV show, so it allows us to gain your perspectives at the same time as being able to contribute actively into the program. So we're using a system called Slido. Now, if you're watching this on Facebook right now, I'd encourage you to open a second screen or another device and log on to slido.com, and then you're going to enter the hashtag Perspectives Live. Now, just so you know, you can actually watch the entire show and play along at home while on slido.com. The feed is coming in directly there. So to get tell you a little bit more about Slido, and what you can do is there you can actually ask questions, which I will be then asking of our guests a little later on in the show, so we can make sure that your voices are heard. You can contribute your opinions and ideas under the ideas section. And most importantly, to get us started, we can actually start off with a polling question. So I want to do that right now. If you can log on, let's go to your polling question, because I want to gain your perspective. And what is the barrier, the primary barrier that hinders the post-secondary education journey of Black, Indigenous, and people of color? Now, is it financial restraints, challenges accessing resources and opportunities? Diversity, equity, and inclusion are not the core of educational institution practices and policies. Number 4, attitude and beliefs that prevent a philosophy of inclusion. Or number 5, lack of vision and leadership at the institutional, government, policy, and community level to develop effective communications, resources, programs, and services. So I can see you're voting already now. Carry on with the voting, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to be coming back and asking a little bit about that and checking in on seeing what those results are a little later on. So now I'm joined by CICAN President and CEO, Denise Amiot. Denise, are you there?
Absolutely. How are you, Andrew? It's great to be here. Bonjour à tous.
It's great. Merci, Denise. I'd like you to take a few moments, if you can, and just chat about what your thoughts are about today's topic.
I'm very, very happy that we are able to have this discussion today. It's important, as you know, to talk about diversity and inclusion and equity, and also look at opportunities for members of the BIPOC community. And before going further, though, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that the land on which we are hosting our virtual show is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people.
Okay, on your thoughts on this, Denise, then, let me ask you, can you share with the audience what CICAN is doing as a national association to address racism and promote inclusion?
Absolutely, Andrew. But maybe before I do that, I would like to share my thoughts with respect to the post-secondary education's perspective. And then, if you allow me, I'll talk about the CICAN's perspective. Because, you know, Andrew, the impact of systemic racism and discrimination on Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, or what we call the BIPOC community, has been an ongoing issue for centuries. And this has been brought to the forefront in a significant way with the Black Lives Matter movement. And so this is something that we all agree that injustices, including systemic, institutional, and targeted racism of any kind, is not acceptable. And with the changing post-secondary education landscape, diversity is being recognized more than ever before. And as you know, there are hundreds of nationalities now on our campuses. There are numerous races and a variety of religious beliefs and socio-economic backgrounds on college campuses.
So, Denise, let me ask you, what does that specifically mean for post-secondary education institutions?
So, for post-secondary education, it is very important to guide students on a journey of discovery. This means to prepare them for jobs and be responsible citizens. You know, post-secondary institutions, they also have a critical role of preparing the next generation of leaders and the next generations of thinkers to advance equity, inclusion, and social justice. And this means that our colleges and institutes, they must ensure that they have the appropriate systems in place, the structures in place, and the institutional policies that are based on respect, dignity, and ensure that there can be a free exchange of ideas to support student success on and off campus. It is critical not only to identify inequities within the institutions, but setting the goals that will help institutions transform themselves into more inclusive spaces for both staff and students. I will stop here because I'm sure that our co-host, Dr. Misheck Mwaba, and our guest speakers will have more to say with respect to post-secondary education.
Thanks, Denise. I appreciate you setting the stage for a great conversation. And Dr. Mwaba will be my guest for our guest speakers later on. I hope you enjoy the discussion, and I hope you can come back at the end because I want to touch base and circle back on an issue a little later on, if that's all right with you. But in the meantime, I hope you can go and vote on the question as well, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Before I do, Andrew, though, I'd like to talk about a couple of things that our association is doing to address racism and promote inclusion.
Absolutely.
So first, CICAN has a long-standing commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion across our different divisions. But we know we have to do more. And CICAN, like many other national associations, has an obligation to pay attention to historical and ongoing injustice and racism. And we must address injustice and play an active role in creating a more just and equitable society. And that means that we need to ensure that we have a hiring plan that addresses gaps in representation among staff. So I will just share with you a couple of initiatives. So first, we recently signed a few months ago the pledge to achieve the 50-30 challenge. This is an initiative co-created by the Government of Canada, civil society, and the private sector. And its goal is to aim to attain gender parity and significant representations of at least 30% of underrepresented groups on boards and senior management positions. And I'm pleased to report that we're very close to achieving that goal. And second, we are collecting best practices in place in our member institutions to promote and ensure equity, diversity, and inclusions, and those will be put on our website. And finally, we created a new internal diversity and inclusions advisory committee in our association. And our next initiative is to create a national advisory committee on equity, diversity, and inclusions with our members. So if you are interested in participating in such an advisory committee, let us know. We will send a call for a proposal. So stay tuned on that. And finally, I'd like to say that we are committed. We are committed to provide opportunities like the show we have today, to engage in discussion, in dialogue on how to apply a diverse and inclusive lens whether it is to policies or approaches or programs. So I'm really looking forward to our discussions today.
That's
Back
really
to you, Andrew.
That's really exciting stuff, Denise. Thank you so much for sharing that, and it is exciting. I'm anxious to hear what my co-host and his colleagues and his guests are going to be have to say on this initiative. But it's exciting to see that we're moving in the right direction. I believe we're moving in the right direction. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to be then now moving forward a little bit and welcoming my co-host, Dr. Misheck Mwaba, President and CEO of Bow Valley College, joining me directly from Calgary. Misheck, how are you? Are you there?
Yes, I am, Andrew. Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be hosting today's episode with you.
I couldn't be happier, and it's such an important conversation. You and we had some privilege of off script, off camera, talking about some of these issues and my realization and edification and awakening to systemic racism throughout the last year, and that is so existent. So I'm so happy that you've agreed to do this, and thank you so much for coming on the show and having the conversation. Earlier on in the show, I had asked the guests, Misheck, our viewers, if they could participate in a poll, and I wanted to share with that and sort of leave that as the basis of initiate the basis of our conversation. If we can bring up the poll results, please, and I'll just ask my producers to bring that up right now. The polling question is we had asked the guests on what is the primary barrier to hinder the post-secondary education journey of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the country. And, the number one answer by 37% was that diversity, equity, and inclusion are not at the core of educational institutions, practices, and policies. That surprises me and doesn't at the same time. Misheck, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. And like you, I'm not surprised. And the reason I'm not surprised is sometimes we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we think by talking about it, then we've actually done something. So really it's about asking ourselves, what are the concrete steps that we need to take to address that? I mean, when Denise was speaking to you, she talked about at colleges and institutes, we are very proud about preparing our learners for jobs. But really, we cannot do that if we don't include the conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that's what's preparing them for the realities of life. Unfortunately, where racism, inequities, exclusion have become a strong strand in society.
Misheck, I know you have a great group of guests that are here with you today. I want to turn the show over to you to carry the conversation on at this point with them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come back a little later on, and then because I know our audience has a whole bunch of questions as well, and I'm going to, if you allow me to ask the questions in a little bit. But how about I turn the show over to you now, introduce your guests, and then carry on this important conversation.
That would be great, Michael. Andrew, sorry.
It's all good.
Michael is the one who is up on the. So my distinguished guests were joining me to talk about this very important but complicated topic. Michael Bach, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Canadian Center for Diversity and Inclusion. Welcome, Michael. Neil Price, who is the Dean, School of Justice and Community Development at Fleming. And Elsa Mondésir Villefort, who is the Chair of Impact National Advisory Committee and member of Youth Canadian Commission. Welcome. And Elsa, you saw that I deliberately did not mention your institution because after practicing how to pronounce your name, I couldn't manage to do the institution, so you can talk about that. But welcome to the three of you. As I was telling Andrew, this is a very complicated but important topic that we need to be talking about. And really, I don't know if there are easy answers, but this is something that has been with us for a long, long time. So just to set context, I'll start maybe with Elsa. When thinking of education, professional development, labor market, where do you see systemic barriers for Black, Indigenous, or people of color?
I'm the first one. Wow. Wasn't expecting that. Thank you, Misheck. So just to clarify, my name is Elsa. I'm a coordinator of an amazing organization in Quebec called Citoyenneté, jeunesse. So it's about civic engagement, youth engagement, just to clarify. About the barriers, there's a lot of barriers, of course. I would speak about opportunities first. We don't have the same opportunities, of course, and I feel like we don't have the same tools to navigate the system because the system has been built for specific persons. The system has been built for the majority. So as minorities, it's really hard sometimes to navigate the system. And I feel like we also have to center the way we think about the system around the experience of BIPOC community, of course, but I will focus on Black youth because this is my experience. So I think there's not enough focus on those experiences. Not to repeat myself, I'm going to let my colleague, if they want to add something to that too.
Thank you, Elsa. So I talk about lack of opportunities, lack of tools, and basically set up at a disadvantage from the word go. Neil, do you have any thoughts on really just setting the context about the barriers on top of what Elsa's articulated?
Absolutely. The barriers are immense, of course, and as you pointed out, Misheck, long-standing, whether they're about access to programs, whether those programs are reflective of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, whether students who move into such programs are able to see faculty who look like them, who have similar lived experiences, navigating environments that can be hostile, racist, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous. And then if you're fortunate to move through post-secondary, then you encounter all of the challenges with respect to entering the labor market. So it's an immense landscape of barriers. And one of the primary challenges in starting to think about opportunities to address these challenges is the question of how do we measure progress? What are the metrics that will allow us to know that we're actually making a fundamental shift? One of the concerns I have is the focus right now, it seems, on representation. And this is the idea that as long as we're able to hire people who are Black, who are Indigenous, or any other ethnicity or race, then we've accomplished the journey, and that's simply not the case. Representation is one aspect of this very fundamental challenge, but it's not the magic solution. There's concerns about ensuring all faculty are trained, for example, have adequate resources to do their job. There's inequities around policy and who are policies meant for. There's challenges around at the departmental level, not just the strategic and governance level, but getting down to hiring at the departmental level and what takes place there. So I just want to raise that concern that representation alone is not the only thing that's going to help us to move forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Neil. So, Michael, Neil talks about not able to see people who look like you, talk about focusing on representation and doing check marks. In the line of setting context, what other systemic barriers are there?
Yeah, thanks, Misheck. I completely agree with both Elsa and Neil. And it's interesting, as I was watching the poll results come in, I felt there was an option missing. There should have been a sixth option, all of the above. That it is simplistic to think that, oh, we just need to remove the financial restraints or the challenges accessing opportunities. Absolutely, those are big concerns. But we also need to focus on the inclusion of the environment. To Neil's point, that it's not as simple as representation. We also need to make sure that it's an inclusive environment where people can experience the organization in a safe and positive way. All of those options in the poll are barriers to inclusion for members of the BIPOC community. And it is simplistic to think we tackle one without tackling the others.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's interesting, the conversation about setting context. It's just demonstrated how complex this topic is. In fact, as possible leaders, it's important that we are also mindful of the blind spots we have. For instance, I'll share at Bow Valley College, we are a very diverse institution, whether you talk about faculty and staff or our learners. And we want to live diversity, equity, and inclusion. But then we have to every day ask ourselves, how are we demonstrating that? So that's very interesting. So as we talk about that, so obviously we have talked about what the barriers are, and there are a lot. We've just scratched the surface. So let's talk about maybe what we can do. So the first question I have, maybe I want to start with Neil. How can we create an open and inclusive space for difficult conversations that allow diverse voices to be heard?
That's a great question. I think part of the way we address that is to get comfortable with risk. I'm always encouraged by leaders who recognize the various serious stakes at hand when we're trying to address racism, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism. And it takes a certain amount of risk to say, we are going to do things we've never done before. We are going to make people uncomfortable in doing so. We may even create an environment where individuals who do not want to shift their thinking or their behavior choose to leave the organization because we've set an expectation around how we are going to move forward. So it takes a certain comfort with risk. It takes a certain boldness. And I think it's also really important to mention that, you know, it also means not having members of the BIPOC community do the heavy lifting on their own. This is one trend that concerns me across our sector, and that is Black, Indigenous, and people of color are being asked to join advisories, are being asked to lead discussions, are being asked to share their stories. This is a lot of work. A lot of it is not compensated. And we really need to address this. We really need to say it is not the role of BIPOC community members to change these institutions that have been fundamentally exclusive and racist for hundreds of years. It's not the work of those communities who also bear the brunt of the issue that we're addressing. So I just want to throw that out there as well, that along with that risk, there needs to be a sense of accountability that this issue cannot be shouldered by the BIPOC community itself.
Thanks, Neil. So, Michael, Neil talks about the heavy lifting sometimes that the BIPOC community are asked to do. Creating space for difficult conversation is tough, but sometimes the Black community, Indigenous, and persons of color feel they are overstretched. How can we create that space for tough conversations?
Listen, I could not agree more with everything that Neil said. We saw this particularly when right after the murder of George Floyd, where employers and organizations across the country turned to their, particularly their Black employees and their Black students and said, educate us on racism. It is not fair, it is not acceptable to put the onus on Black, Brown, and Indigenous people and other people of color to be the educators, unless there's someone like me and it's actually their job. I think to Neil's point, there has to be a willingness on leaders' part to take a risk. I was just on a call with a client just before this, and they asked me how they can go about making sure that they don't make any mistakes. And my response was, it's so easy. You can't. You're going to make mistakes. And as leaders, you have to be willing to take that risk. You have to act with humility. You have to be willing to own your mistakes and listen with the intention of learning, to open yourself up to those things, because mistakes are going to happen. But sticking your head in the sand and pretending that it's not happening is not having any impact. You have to have a plan. And that's the one thing I would add to Neil's commentary is, what's the plan? How do you know what you're going to do? How do you know what success looks like? There needs to be a plan in place to make sure that we're moving forward. This is and pardon the expression, but this is a strategic priority. It is not a nice to have. It is not a program. This is a strategic priority, and therefore there needs to be a plan in place to understand how we're going to achieve those goals.
Thank you, Michael. Elsa, from your work, how can we create space that allow for tough conversations?
Well, I think my colleague said it very well, but I will add that there's a need to be more specific, actually. So Michael talked about the poll and said that we should have had all of the above. Actually, I think it's great that we do not have all of the above, because we need to be more specific sometimes. If we always see the situation as broad, the problem as broad, we won't do anything. So sometimes you have to start by doing something, even though it's little, and knowing that it's connected to other issues. For instance, we spoke about BIPOC. Many people use Black, Indigenous, and people of color, but I cannot speak for everyone right now. Today, I can speak for myself. I cannot speak for every Black woman, Black young woman right now, Black young woman from Montreal even. I can just speak for myself. So there's a need to be specific. The students, like what is the population of your campus? The students, are they like from this country or this country? What are their experience? I feel like it's really important to tackle that, to be specific and to embrace, of course, discomfort. You have to be ready to embrace discomfort and be guided by discomfort. So what are my feelings? What's weird for me? What's not working? You have to let this guide you to start and to do the work. Another thing that I had in my notes was don't do it if you're not ready to act on it. Because I've been asked a lot of questions in my life. What should we do for women? What should we do for Black women? But if you're not ready to do anything, you should just go on Google and Google what should we do about Black students. But do not come up and ask people if you're not ready to do anything else, because there's enough literature right now. So, but if you're ready to make a real change and you're like, okay, I need to act, then you can go and open up those spaces. I will also say that it's important not to be too performative in your allyship. And you ask yourself those questions, like, why do I want to do this? Do I want to do it because I have to do it? Or do I want to do it because it needs to be done? This is really important to ask yourself those questions before doing anything else. And I feel like if you do the work, if you're really to act on it, you'll find ways and solution and specific solution for your institution to open up those space, because every solution is not good for every institution. So if you're willing to do work, you'll find your personal and specific solution.
So the three of you have really hammered home about the need to have action items. So maybe I want to start with Neil with this question. What are the effective actions being taken to reduce systemic barriers for the BIPOC community?
It's an interesting question. I think in our previous conversation, I mentioned how the word effective troubles me a little bit, because it suggests almost as though there's a list of actions that if we take them, we'll somehow work our way through this. And so I think our panelists today have just shown how complex this is. And so I think there are steps we can take, but all of them are fraught with difficulty, with challenges. I'm encouraged by the fact that we're having these conversations at very senior levels in institutions. There was a time where, as a Black faculty member, these conversations were only had in the hallways among Black faculty and students about how we were feeling in these institutions. So I'm encouraged that we're seeing this taken up at very senior levels. I'm encouraged by calls for collecting data in terms of identifying, to Elsa's point, what are the specific identities and groups. So we're not just speaking in blanket terms about these experiences, but we're collecting the necessary information to know who's on campus and to know how to connect with them. I'm also encouraged by the fact that we seem to be more and more responsive, and Elsa raises a good point about being performative, but it seems that institutions are responsive or responding more so to issues that are impacting our communities. And so we're thinking about students not just as students on campus, but we're starting to recognize, I think, that we have to really think about our students holistically, their experiences on campus, the inequities that they experience off campus, and how that impacts their trajectory for learning and for success. So, I'm encouraged by some of these things. There's a part of me that worries about having not an accountability, quite frankly, to move these initiatives along. But they are encouraging. But again, I think we need to always think through these issues as being complex and context specific.
So Michael raises very important points there. So, sorry, Neil, maybe Michael, to build on that one, if we have to look at the education system, how can the Canadian education system align itself to strategically amplify the voices of Black, Indigenous, or people of color community, or create an inclusive space to have difficult conversations and have different voices heard?
Yeah, this is a tough. We're looking for a really easy answer to a very tough question, and I totally agree with Neil on the use of the term effective. I think education is a critical component. One of my bigger concerns is about the bubble of student life and being, a Fleming College, George Brown, Douglas College can create a completely inclusive space for faculty, staff, for students, and then you go out into the world, and I'm concerned that that's not necessarily the world that they face. So I think in part it's about making sure that it is an inclusive space by providing education for the faculty and staff, by making sure that students are educated, by making sure that policies and procedures are in place to address issues of racism and other forms of discrimination that occur for all members of the college infrastructure. But then I also think that colleges and institutions have a role to play in educating society on the importance of inclusive behavior. I think there is you're going to be sending students out into the world with significant education and an understanding of these topics. That's great. But we also have a responsibility to educate the rest of society and tackle some of these issues so that we aren't sending students out to a toxic environment.
So this is a very complicated topic, and all the questions we've had would have taken more than a day to effectively address them. But I really appreciate all your thoughts, perspectives you have brought. This is a conversation that we'll continue having. So thank you very much, Elsa. Thank you very much, Neil. Thank you very much, Michael, for your contribution and for what you are doing to support the diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you.
Let me just echo what Misheck was saying, and thank you to everybody. But we have a lot of questions coming in from the audience here right now as well, and I would like to have the privilege to sort of direct them, if I may. And Misheck, if I could, I'd like to have you as one of the guests on this panel as well, if I can carry the panel conversation on, because I think you play an important role, in your voice I'd like to have as well. And the top question that's come in, and you sort of just asked it to Michael, but I'm going to ask it to you. How can Canadian education system align itself to amplify the voices of the BIPOC community to create inclusive space for ensuring difficult conversations to be heard? I want to hear your opinion, Misheck, on that, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all. I think as post-secondary institution, we need to take the lead in creating those inclusive spaces. And really, for me, what that means is being able to promote, for the leaders to promote a culture where there can be honest and genuine conversation. Creating a culture where people are able to challenge and address the stereotype perceptions, where people are able to remove the blind sides we have regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'll just share some of the things we've done at Bow Valley College. I mean, we brought together a college-wide group that involved employees and learners to just look at what does inclusion mean from the learner's perspective. We've created across the college instructors from different programs coming together to basically share what are the things they are doing to promote inclusion, diversity, equity as they're having their classes. We are just now working on really looking at reviewing all our policies, the learner policies, the academic policies, the employee policies, really with that diversity, equity, and the inclusion lens. So, like I said at the beginning, it's not just enough to have words written down. I mean, Bow Valley College, like I said, we are a diverse community. We've got to respect and inclusion as the two values. But how are we demonstrating that we are living those values?
Neil, can I ask for you to chime in on that same question? And I'll repeat it one more time. How can Canadian education system align itself to amplify the voices of the BIPOC community to create those inclusive spaces? I know you touched on it a bit earlier, but I'd like your perspective as an educator now and the dean of the school as well.
Absolutely. I think it's really important for institutions to have healthy, respectful relationships with community organizations, with student groups, including activist groups. There needs to be, and this is what I meant earlier about risk-taking, there needs to be a sense of the role of colleges, the role that we have to convene space, to ensure that that public resource is allowing individuals who might not have a platform to put their perspectives forward, that they have it at a college. And colleges are uniquely positioned to do this because historically we've had a very different mandate from universities, for example. So I really think it's about having open, respectful, and reciprocal relationships, not just with individuals on campus, but with surrounding communities, and really putting forward the college as a space that belongs to the community, and that should always have an open door for conversations, for debate, to amplify that we've been using today. So I really like the idea of getting back to that sort of foundational role of colleges in communities.
Thanks, Neil. If I can direct the next question directly to, I'd like to start with Elsa on the next question and then move to Michael if I can get your opinion on this. But the next question that came in, where do you think systemic barriers are mostly taking place? In education system, the community, or labor market? And Elsa, I'm asking for your perspective first on this issue because I'd really like to hear from a community perspective, because I know that's the angle that you're coming from first. And then I'll move to Michael if it's okay. Elsa?
Cool. I would love to speak about an experience that I had with the Global Center for Pluralism and the Canadian Commission of UNESCO. We worked with many teachers from high school. So we did training, so personal development training, working about issues regarding anti-Black racism specifically. And we spoke with them, and the first thing is that they just don't know about those issues. So teachers were feeling clueless about those issues, and they were feeling that they didn't have the space to just learn, to get to know more about what was happening and the tools to actually act on their classroom. So when I'm thinking about barriers, I feel like there's a lot of things that we could do if we work with teachers, if we work with professionals in those institutions, to make them understand about concept like bias. They didn't understand that maybe the student is not as loud as you think he or her is. Maybe they are not as bad as you think they are. It's maybe you have some bias about some communities. So working around teachers, working around the institution, working about training and getting support when you need some support, because sometimes you just need to work with a professional and it's not within that you're going to find a solution. I feel like those are solutions that are helping us actually tackling those barriers. Because if I'm a student and I'm going to my professor and I'm going to tell this person that, about microaggression, about the use of the N-word, about this or that, and the teacher or the professional is not able to have a meaningful conversation with me, I feel like this is some type of barrier too that we should address. So the training of professionals could be really helpful, because sometimes it's not about finding the right solution. It's just about everyone acknowledging that there's a problem. So let's start by that.
Michael, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a tough one, Andrew. Doing a comparison, you are not comparing apples to oranges in looking at colleges versus community versus workplaces. Employers have, a lot of employers in this country have spent a lot of time and effort on tackling this topic and creating inclusive spaces and safe spaces. Not universally, but we've seen a significant focus there for decades. Colleges and institutions are, I think, playing a bit of catch up in some instances, but at the same time, they've also been places of social justice for many years. The community is a bit more difficult because it is the intersection of where all communities meet. And it's the intersection where you can see the most sparks fly, whether it is amongst different ethnocultural groups that have historically not gotten along, whether it's amongst LGBTQ2 plus peoples and people from fundamentalist religions. The community is a little harder to control. But I also think if we can spend our time both in the college and institutions environment as well as in workplaces, that trickles out into the street. If you have an understanding of inclusion for people of color, then from your workplace or from your college, then it's a safe bet that that is going to be an attitude that you carry with you out into the community. But I think it still presents a fair share of challenges.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I couldn't agree with you more. There are a lot of challenges ahead on this conversations on a whole bunch of levels. I want to read this next question and get everybody's opinion on it, please, if you don't mind. I'm going to put on my glasses, so bear with me here. I'm getting old, but I don't want to get it wrong. This comes in and it says, as a non-BIPOC post-secondary student, I wonder what actions students like me can take to help to make their institutions accountable for walking the talk. Let me go around the table, but I want to end with Misheck on this one, okay, if I could. So how about we start with Elsa? You go first, Elsa.
I was feeling that this question was going to go towards me. I would say ask other students what they want to do. Like, is there people from those communities on your campus? Go and ask if there is there a group working on those issues. I know that this is not a cool answer. This is not a specific answer. We've said many times that it is so broad, but I feel like I need to repeat the fact that you have to be specific about what's happening in your college, what's happening even in your classroom, in your Zoom, in your Teams, what's happening there. Where do you see that there's people of color? Do you see that there's organizations? Start by doing that, and then start by looking up on the internet, because the internet is full of amazing resources. I know that it's not fun to hear, but let's start by that. And also just make sure that if you go around, do not speak to someone from those communities just because you see that this person is Indigenous. Let me go ask the student because his or hers, they are Indigenous, so they're going to have the answer. Just see the issue as a concept, look, search, and try to analyze what's happening on your campus. And then if you see that there's nothing, this is the first thing. You see that there's no group, there's no professional working on this, there's no committee. So start by asking could we just build a space to discuss? Could we have a conversation? Could we have a webinar, just a Zoom call, and to speak with others who might be interested about this issue too. I know it's not cool. It's not really like people want to have 1, 2, 3. You have to have specific actions, but it's really a long-term process.
Okay, real quickly, we have time for one. There's one last question I want to get to because we only have time for one last question. So this is going to be the lightning round question, folks. Okay, and this is the next most popular voted question, and I'm gonna read it here. The BIPOC, or I guess they're referring to the term BIPOC, comes from the USA. This is Canada. Believe we should use IBPOC, I guess, in respect and be respectful for our Indigenous and not BIPOC is easy to say. Thoughts? So I guess what they're asking is Indigenous Black people of color as opposed to Black people of color. Thoughts real quickly, 30 seconds each, go around the table. Let's start with Michael, you first.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm not a big fan of grouping entire communities together. So the term people of color is representative of so many different experiences. So I don't necessarily love that. But at the same time, I also think it's a bit of a distraction if we get focused on the specifics of the order of the letters in the acronym. We should be focusing on the change and not on the way we say it.
Elsa, you next?
Yeah, same as Michael said. I don't mind how you say it. When you say it, just do something about it. So I don't mind if you want to say this or that. Let's do something about it.
How about you, Neil?
I agree entirely with my colleagues. Let's not get into what could set us up on a divisive path. You know, thinking about the acronym, but focus on intentional, meaningful work.
Misheck, the last word goes to you on this one.
I couldn't agree more with what everybody has said. Really, the focus should be on what are the issues and what can we do about those issues.
This has been a wonderful conversation. I'd like to, Misheck, if I'll ask you to hold back, but I would like to thank Neil, Elsa, and Michael for joining us today. And I really appreciate your feedback. Maybe, Misheck, we can invite, you and I can just invite Denise in real quickly to get her thoughts on what she heard today. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Perfect. Denise, are you there?
Absolutely. You can see me now?
We can see you now. What were your thoughts today, Denise?
I really enjoyed the conversation because we did not focus only on what are the barriers, but also what can be done about it, some concrete solutions, and some practices that, you know, about acting. I want to share because both Neil and Michael talked about something that I thought was very important. It's not only about what's happening on campus. And that we have to look at the person as a whole because they also live in the community. And I want to share something that has been done and is currently being done by a very small college in British Columbia. It's Nicola Valley Institute of Technology, where what they are doing, they partner with Indigenous communities to offer what they call community-based assessment services for prospective learners interested in completing post-secondary education. And what they do three things. The first thing, they look at what are what exists in the community with respect to the needs for the community. What are the priorities with respect to jobs, if you want, that cannot be filled? Second, what they do, they offer, they ask who is interested in those things, and they take those prospective learners, they do an assessment of their skills, and they develop an individual action plan for those students. So to come back to what Elsa said earlier, when she said, you know, do something about it, because that's what is important. You know, it's not enough to just talk about what we do, but it's to listen, to open the dialogue and act.
Let me just add real quickly, if I may, Misheck, Denise, to the two of you, thank you for creating the safe space to be able to have the conversation. It's a tough conversation sometimes. It's a very tough conversation most of the time, but it's a reckoning that we come with, and I want to thank you sincerely for having that conversation, for allowing us this opportunity today. So to the two of you, I appreciate your time, and hopefully you've helped me become a more human in all this, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Andrew, before you leave, it's my pleasure to thank you because you're the one who thought about this concept 5 months ago. You've done 5 episodes with us, and I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your support and for your patience in supporting us and allowing us to have those monthly conversations with our members. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup de ton support. Thanks a lot, Andrew.
Well, the pleasure's been all mine. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to wrap up and thank everybody for watching today. First, I have to thank our sponsor one more time, without whose support we wouldn't have been able to make this available. So thank you to the Accreditation Council for Business Schools and Programs. And I want to encourage everybody not to miss the next English episode that'll take place on Thursday, March 11th. As Denise mentioned, this is my last show, but you're going to be joined by a great colleague and an incredible host in Catherine Clark, who will carry on these conversations and is very anxious to get your perspectives on the next show. And in 2 weeks after that, on March 24th, is the French episode of Perspective en Direct with the host Normand Latour. So on behalf of all of us, I wish you a wonderful day, and please let's carry on this important conversation long into the future. Thank you very much for watching, everybody.